Hey y'all, let's sew an Isadora pattern. I'm doing the tank top option, so I've cut my front main bodice in the tank and I have the low v-neck. I'm also doing the small cutouts, so you can see along the bottom I have snipped along the cutout marking, so I have one main on the fold of the front and one lining on the fold for the front piece. And the same with the back, I have one on the fold in the main piece and one on the fold in the lining piece, again with those little snips along the bottom. And here is the swing skirt, and I have cut my small cutout pieces, and I have two skirts. The first step is going to be to place your front and back bodice right sides together, aligning the raw edges, and we are going to sew them together along the shoulder seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then you're going to do the same thing with your lining pieces. Put them right sides together and sew them with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Next, we're going to work on the neckline. So you are going to place your lining and your main bodices together, aligning all the raw edges and the shoulder seams. I like to nest my shoulder seams so that they lay nicely. And then we're going to sew them together along the neckline with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I like to start with my sewing machine on this step so I get a really crisp V neck, and then I will move and finish it with my serger afterwards, which you don't have to do that. You can either sew it with your sewing machine only or sew it with your serger only. After you get them stitched together, before you flip it, you are going to clip the corners of your squared neckline if you are doing that step. So you will clip to the seam allowances, but not through the stitch line that you've already created. Then we are going to press it very nicely, and we are going to press it right sides out. Then you're going to understitch the lining. So I press that seam towards the lining piece, and then I'm going to top stitch it directly on top to hold it in place so that the lining doesn't peek through. And I'm going to do this for the entire neckline seam, and then again give it a really nice press. Now it's time to finish the tank top arm size. So you are going to open one side of your bodice so the lining and main are away from each other and that neckline seam is flat. Then you're going to take the other side of your bodice and you're going to begin rolling it towards that open side. After you roll it all the way up, you're going to place that rolled bodice side directly on top of the neckline seam so it's centered, and you are going to wrap the lining bodice over the rolled portion so that the right side of the lining is matched up with the right side of the main bodice. Then make sure that rolled bodice is out of the way, and we are going to stitch this armscye together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to pull the bodice right side out by just reaching in, grabbing that rolled up bodice and gently pulling until it is right side out. Then just repeat the steps to burrito roll the other armscye so that both sides of the armscyes are finished, and then give it a really nice press. And then you can set your bodice aside while we begin to work on our skirt. Since I'm doing the cutouts, I'm going to press the cutout edge towards the wrong side. If you are doing the smaller cutout like I am, then you are going to press a 1/4 inch to the wrong side. And if you're doing the larger cutout, you're going to press 1/2 inch towards the wrong side. And then you will just edge stitch that cutout in place. So you're going to do this on each side of the front and on the back skirt so that all 4 cutouts are hemmed. Next, we're going to roll our skirt into our bodice to finish the cutouts. So I have my front bodice with the lining and the mane pulled away from each other, and I found the center of my main front bodice. I'm going to match the center of the skirt to that center point on the bodice, and then I'm going to match the hem cutout to the marking on my bodice. So the little snip we made, I'm going to pin that hem edge directly to that snip and then pin the bodice in place. And I'm going to do this on both of the cutout sides. Then once I have that pinned in place, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to baste that skirt to the main bodice only, so you still want that lining pulled away. I'm going to baste the skirt with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Next, we're going to work on actually rolling that skirt. So I still have my bodice with my lining and mane pulled away from each other and laying flat. I'm going to take my skirt and I'm going to begin rolling it up towards the bodice, and I'm going to place that skirt at the armscye seam, and I'm just making sure that the skirt is nice and flat. Then I'm going to take my back bodice and I'm also going to start rolling it toward that skirt, and I'm going to place it directly in the middle like this. Then I'm going to grab my lining front bodice and I'm going to wrap it around these rolled up skirt and back bodice. I'm going to match the cutout snips and all the raw edges, and I'm going to pin it in place. And you just want to make sure that your back bodice and your skirt is out of the way. And you can either baste this seam again with your sewing machine, or you can just stitch it together again with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you have that seam sewn, you're just going to reach inside and grab the rolled bodice and skirt and pull it right side out. You can see here how nicely the cutout is now finished, and we are going to repeat this process with the back bodice and the back skirt. So you're going to pull your back lining and your black main bodices apart so they're flat, and you're going to find the center of your back bodice, then match the center of your skirt to the center of the bodice, then again match the hem cutout to that snip on your bodice on each side of the cutout, and then take this to your sewing machine once it's all pinned and baste the skirt in place with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now with your back bodice lining and mane still pulled apart, you're going to roll the back skirt now. So roll it up towards the bodice and place it out of the way. Make sure that seam is flat. Then you're going to have now the front bodice and skirt, so it's going to be a little bit thicker, and you're going to roll that towards the center and wrap that back bodice lining over both of those rolls. Match all the raw edges and the cutout pieces, and then sew this together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then once it's sewn, again you will grab those rolls and gently pull so that it's right side out, and then all of your cutouts on the front and back should now be finished, and you can give your front and back bodices a really nice press. Now we're going to work on the bodice side seams. Since the tank top and the cutout portions are already finished, This is a little bit tricky, but it leaves you with a really nice finish. So I'm going to put my bodices right sides together, and I'm going to pin the main front and back together along the arm size seam and the cutout seam. Then I'm going to reach inside and I'm going to grab just those main front and back pieces, and I'm going to gently pull it so that I have this circle here with the main front and back bodice together and the lining front and back bodice together. You don't have to pull it very much, you just need a little bit sticking out so that we can sew these together. And what you're going to do is you're going to sew together the main front and back and the lining front and back together, but you're going to leave about a 2-inch opening on the lining side so that we can flip the bodice right side out later. What I like to do, because I am leaving an opening, is I like to use my sewing machine first to stitch the 1/2-inch seam allowance, and then I go back and I finish it with my serger. Again, remember to leave that little 2-inch opening. After you have it all sewn together, then you can pull it back right side out again and give it a nice press. So your front bodice should be completely finished, and then your back bodice is going to be finished except with that small little opening. Now it's time to finish the other side seam. So I have my bodices right sides together, and I have pinned the main front and back along the arm size seam and the finished cutout seam. Then, using that opening we left on the other side seam, I'm going to work my way through and grab the main front and back bodice and then pull it through that opening so that the main front and back bodice are right sides together and the lining front and back pieces are together. So you should have this loop. Mine came a little bit undone, so I'm just repinning to make sure that all the seams and the raw edges match. Then once you have this together, you are going to sew the main front and back and the lining front and back with a 1/2-inch seam allowance, and you do not need to leave an opening on this side, so you can just sew it in the round the entire way with a 1/2-inch seam allowance, and then you're going to pull it back through that little hole we left on the other side of the lining, and you're going to give it a nice press. So now both side seams should be finished, and the arm size are all finished, and the cutout. So you still have that little hole in the lining, and you are going to press the 1/2-inch seam allowance towards the wrong side, and then you can either hand stitch it closed, align the lining, or just use a stretch stitch on your machine to close that little hole. Next, we need to sew the side seams on our skirt. So I have my skirt pieces right sides together, aligning all the raw edges and the hemmed cutout portion. And then you're going to sew the skirts together from the hemline all the way to the cutout with a 1/2-inch seam allowance. You can use your sewing machine at the top of the cutouts so that they don't move around when you're serging them. The final step is going to be to press the bottom hem a 1/2-inch towards the wrong side, and then edge stitch the entire hemline in place. And then your Isadora dress is complete after you have hemmed the skirt. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below and I'll try to answer them. As always, we would love to see your Isadora. If you make one, you can post it in our Facebook group or tag us on Instagram at Made for Mermaids, hashtag Isadora pattern, hashtag Made for Mermaids patterns.